The explosion at my husband's 45th birthday party wasn't fireworks. It was the sound of 15 years of marriage imploding, broadcast live over the Bose speakers. They called me dead weight. They didn't know this weight was about to bring their entire empire crashing down. This isn't the story of a scorned wife. This is the meticulously calculated record of an escape. My name is Ilara. The crystal chandeliers of our Upper East Side penthouse were dripping light, making everything glitter with a false sheen, just like the smile plastered on my face. Julian, my husband, was holding court at his 45th birthday party. He held a champagne flute, surrounded by his family, the very people I had served for 15 long years. My heart gave a strange, offbeat lurch, that familiar sense of an approaching storm. I knew tonight would change everything. I slipped behind a marble pillar, intending to grab more ice for a guest, and then I heard it. Julian's voice, deep and smug, talking to his father and his brother. David. Ilara. She's dead weight. Dad. Always has been. Great at throwing a party. But otherwise, useless. A low, rumbling chuckle came from my father-in-law and David. The room seemed to shrink, the expensive classical music fading until the only sound was the rush of blood in my ears, hot and violent. A cold silence washed over me, instantly replacing the spike of rage. This was not the first time I had heard the sentiment, but it was the first time they had said it thinking I was truly out of earshot. I watched them through the narrow gap, saw David clap Julian on the shoulder. As long as she decorates the house nicely and does not spend too much. Julian shrugged, taking a sip of his champagne. She would not even know how. That little trust fund from her aunt just pays for her stupid craft supplies. I turned on my heel, my movements precise, walking straight toward the Sonos sound system I had spent the entire morning calibrating for this very party. My phone connected instantly. I took one deep, steadying breath, feeling the expensive silk of my gown slide against my skin. Suddenly cold. I had a folder on my phone, encrypted, labeled insurance. Inside was an audio file from the security camera in Julian's study, a camera he had installed for security, but foolishly forgot also recorded crystal-clear sound. I stepped into the center of the living room, right where the laughter was loudest. I did not tap a glass for attention. I simply hit play. The first sound that crackled through the speakers was a sharp intake of breath, then Julian's voice, thick with a different kind of excitement. I cannot do this. David will kill us. And then her voice. Amanda, David's wife, my sister-in-law. He will never know. Now shut up and... The room went dead silent. A champagne flute shattered on the marble floor. I looked directly into David's eyes as they turned to stone. My father-in-law's jaw hung open, the color draining from his face. Julian spun around, his face a sheet of white paper. He lunged toward me, roaring, "Ilara, turn it off!" I let the phone fall from my hand to the floor, the audio still playing, echoing through the tomb-like silence. "Happy birthday, Julian," I said, my voice terrifyingly clear and calm. "Since you think I am dead weight, I decided to drop my own. That would be you." In the absolute chaos that erupted, Amanda letting out a full-throated scream. David launching himself across the room at Julian. My father-in-law yelling for someone to do something. I walked calmly, almost serenely, to the coat closet. I retrieved my Burberry trench coat. I picked up the one pre-packed handbag waiting by the door. Inside was my passport, $20,000 in cash, and one clean, untraceable phone. I walked out of the penthouse, the elevator doors sliding shut, leaving the ruins of the Vance family screaming behind me. I did not call a cab. I walked 12 blocks in the cold New York night, the sirens from my building already echoing in the distance, a sound that felt like it was chasing me. I walked into a mid-range hotel in K-Town, the kind of place with fluorescent lighting and anonymous carpets, where no one looks at you twice. I did not use a credit card. I paid cash for one night. Inside the room, I locked the deadbolt, pulled the SIM card from my personal phone, snapped the small plastic chip in half, and dropped it into the toilet. I flushed. Then, I powered on the clean phone. There was only one number saved my asset lawyer in Delaware. "Activate storm protocol," I said, the moment he picked up. "Right now." It was the code phrase we had agreed upon 6 months ago. Storm protocol was immediate and irreversible. It initiated the liquidation and transfer of every asset from my silly little trust fund, which Julian, in his arrogance, never bothered to investigate into an anonymous Nevada trust. He had no idea that little fund was actually worth $8 million from my grandmother's early biotech stocks. Simultaneously, the protocol triggered the immediate sale of the studio apartment in Brooklyn I secretly owned under a private LLC. Julian thought I was taking pottery classes on Thursday afternoons. In reality, I was meeting with my legal team, building my escape route. I looked in the cheap, water-stained bathroom mirror. Ilara Vance was dead. The woman looking back at me. Ilara Hayes, my maiden name, 42 years old, looked exhausted, pale, and hunted, but her eyes were on fire. I washed the hardened, expensive hairspray out, grabbed the medical scissors from my pre-packed first aid kit, and began to cut. I hacked off my waist-length hair, the hair Julian always said he loved, until it was a short, messy, unrecognizable bob. I received a single encrypted email on the clean phone, complete. It meant the money was secure. It meant that when Julian and his lawyers woke up, they would find nothing but a nearly empty joint checking account. I changed out of the silk gown, leaving it in a heap on the floor, and pulled on dark jeans, a heavy wool sweater, and my hiking boots. I left the hotel at 3 a.m. I was not flying. Airports are too easy to track, and Julian owned favors at every major terminal. I walked to Penn Station, blending in with the late-night travelers and the homeless, buying a one-way Amtrak ticket to Chicago with cash. As the train began to move, pulling slowly out of the station, leaving the neon-drenched city behind, the phone I still had Julian's phone, which I had grabbed from his study before the party began to scream. It vibrated violently against the seat beside me. Dozens of texts, an avalanche of missed calls. From him, from David, from his father. "Ilara, you have destroyed everything. Come back here, you bitch. We can fix this." I smirked, looking at my new, sharp-edged reflection in the dark window, feeling the steady rhythm of the train pulling me away. "No," I whispered to the glass. "We cannot." I had lit the fuse. Now it was time to get clear of the blast radius. In Chicago, I walked to a public parking garage near the station. A 2018 Subaru Outback was waiting for me on the 3rd level. The key was tucked in the rear wheel well, exactly as planned. It had been purchased with cash through a third party 2 weeks prior. I dropped Julian's screaming, vibrating phone into a nearby trash can, burying it under a coffee cup. I got in the car. I did not look back. I drove west, heading toward the only place the internet had described in terms that matched how I felt: wild, unforgiving, and beautiful. The Oregon coast. I drove for 3 days straight, a hypnotic blur of highways and cheap coffee. I stopped only for gas and to catch a few hours of uneasy sleep in roadside motels, paying cash for everything. It felt like I was molting, shedding a skin. With every mile that put New York further behind me, another layer of my old life peeled away. The initial incandescent rage had cooled, settling into a cold, sharp focus. I was not running away. I was moving toward a target. I arrived in Cannon Rock, Oregon, in the middle of a full-blown November gale. The wind screamed like a tortured soul, and the Pacific Ocean was a churning, angry mess of gray and white, throwing spray high onto the black, jagged rocks. The tiny town, huddled against the coastline, looked completely cut off from the rest of the world. It was perfect. I found the local real estate office. A bell tinkled as I entered, dripping rainwater onto the worn rug. An older man named Gus looked up from his desk, his eyes wide with skepticism as he took in my soaked, determined appearance. "I want to see the point," I said, my voice hoarse, pointing to a faded, thumbtacked photograph on a bulletin board. Gus immediately tried to talk me out of it. "Lady, you do not want the point. Nobody wants the point. It's an old Coast Guard station, been abandoned for 30 years. It's hanging off the cliff. There is no decent access road, and the winter will actively try to kill you. It's unbuildable." "I will buy it," I said. An hour later, after we had hiked the muddy, treacherous path to see it. He was right. It was horrific. The windows were shattered, the roof was caving in, and the wind howled through the empty, rotting structure. But it stood there, defiant on its rocky perch, taking the full force of the storm head-on. It was me. "We have not even discussed a price," Gus stammered, holding onto his hat. "I will pay the asking price. In cash." I used my Nevada LLC to make the offer right there, on his rattling clipboard. Gus nearly dropped his false teeth. You are sure," he sputtered as we squelched our way back to his truck. "You cannot even get a cell signal out here. And your money." "My money is legitimate," I said, handing him the banking information. "And I like the quiet." I stood on that cliff alone for a long time after he left, feeling the rain lash my face, the taste of salt on my lips. It was the first clean thing I had felt in 15 years. The suffocating perfumed air of the penthouse was finally being scrubbed from my lungs. That night, in a bleak motel room in town, the first email from Julian's legal team arrived, forwarded by my lawyer. It was full of threats. They were moving to freeze all my assets, citing my erratic behavior and mental instability following the unfortunate incident at the party. They accused me of theft. They painted me as a hysterical woman having a breakdown. They thought I was collapsing. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow the only light in the room. I did not Google divorce lawyers. I Googled structural engineers, wave energy specialists, and architects specializing in impossible builds. They had called me dead weight. I was about to show them what this weight could build. I was going to build a fortress. I spent the next month camped out in the town library and at the Salty Dog, the only cafe with reliable Wi-Fi. I lived on bitter black coffee and stale blueberry muffins, hunched over my laptop, mapping out my business plan. This was not going to be a quaint bed and breakfast. This was going to be the Perch. It would be an ultra-exclusive, hyper-luxury resort for a very specific clientele, people who wanted to experience the raw, terrifying beauty of storm watching from a place of absolute safety and comfort. My plan was 150 pages long. It included architectural sketches for small, fortress-like cabins built from reinforced glass and steel, cantilevered over the cliffs. It detailed a main lodge restaurant using 100% locally sourced ingredients and a fully self-sustaining power system based on wave and solar energy. The target market burned out tech CEOs from Silicon Valley and Seattle willing to pay thousands a night for a truly unique, isolated experience. Now I needed a builder. I found Samantha Sam Kruger. She was the only contractor in a 50-mile radius with a professional-looking website, and she was a woman. Her office was a chaotic, cavernous warehouse smelling of sawdust and ozone. She looked me over through a pair of safety goggles, a welding torch still in her hand. "The point," she said, letting out a short, harsh laugh. "Are you insane? That place will kill my crew before we even break ground." I unrolled my plans across her cluttered, sawdust-covered workbench. "I am not asking if it is easy. I am asking if you can do it. This is my budget," I said, pointing to the line item for $8 million. "And this is the geological engineering report I already commissioned." Sam stopped laughing. She pushed her goggles up and spent the next 20 minutes in total silence, reviewing the reports. The only sound was the buzz of a welder in the next room. "These seawalls," she said finally, tapping the schematic. "This design. This will eat half your budget before we pour the first foundation, and you are going to need permits from the county, the state, and probably God himself." "I know," I said. That is why I am hiring you. You have a reputation as the only one around here who can pull off impossible projects." Sam stared at me, her gaze intense. "I need 20% up front, non-refundable, and I get total control over the engineering. No arguments." I transferred the $1.6 million to her business account right there, from my phone. She watched the notification pop up on her own screen, her eyes widening. She looked from her phone back to me. "Damn. All right. New York. Welcome to Oregon. We start Monday." While Sam began assembling her team, I started the war on paper. I walked into the county planning office. The board members looked at me as if I had grown a second head when I submitted the application. A commercial resort at the Point. Absolutely not. Impossible. I had prepared for this. I did not talk about luxury. I talked about economics. I presented my impact report. This project will create 30 permanent year-round jobs in a town that desperately needs them. It includes binding contracts with your local fishermen for the restaurant. And then, the linchpin. I will be personally funding the construction of a new, paved access road which the town can use for emergency services, cutting response times to the North Coast in half. They stopped shuffling their papers. They started to listen. The real fight was just beginning. Sam pulled me aside at the construction site, yelling over the sound of an excavator hitting rock. "You need someone who actually understands the ocean," she shouted, wiping grime from her face. "Not just one of these tourist charter captains who stick to sunny days. You need Kalen." I asked who that was. "He is Siletz, native. His family has fished these exact waters since before this place was even called Oregon. They say he can smell when a storm is going to turn just by the air. I found Kalen on the docks later that day, his hands moving in a blur as he mended a heavy fishing net. He looked to be in his 40s, his face carved from wood and deeply weathered by sea salt, and his eyes were dark and seemed to look right through me. I explained my project, the luxury cabins, the storm watching. I offered him a generous consultant fee. He did not even look up from his net. "I do not work for rich people who come here to build glass boxes and destroy our coast," he said flatly, his voice low and steady. "I am not destroying it," I replied, my voice just as firm, matching his. "I am building something that respects it. I want my guests to see the storm the way you see it, to feel its power, and I do not want them to die doing it. I need you to make it safe. I need you to show them what is real." I took a breath, committing to the gamble. "I will pay you 30% of all profits from the experiences you curate and lead." His hands stopped moving. He slowly looked up, his gaze analytical. 30%, he repeated, as if tasting the words. "That is a serious offer." He stood up, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. "I will look at your site." When he arrived at the Point, he ignored the blueprints Sam and I had spread on the hood of her truck. He just walked the cliff edge for 10 minutes, staring at the water, the rocks, and the sky. Finally, he pointed to the bright orange flags marking the foundation for Cabin 1, our flagship suite. "Do not build there," he said. "The big January storms will hook around that point and rip it off the cliff. You build back 10 feet, behind that basalt outcrop. It will shield you from the worst of it." Sam immediately pulled out her topographical maps and her wind shear projections. She cursed, tapping her pencil on the map. "Damn it," she muttered, looking at me. He is right. Kalen became my most important and most unlikely ally. He was a silent, intense teacher. He taught me about the difference between a flood tide and an ebb tide, how the high, wispy clouds stacking in the west warned of a gale, and mostly, he taught me a kind of patience I had never known. He moved with the rhythm of the ocean, not the frantic, desperate pace of a New York boardroom. He also vouched for me, connecting me with the local fishermen for a steady, sustainable supply of seafood for the future restaurant. The first real threat arrived not by email, but in person. A man in an expensive suit and shiny Italian loafers walked into the Salty Dog. He stood out like a sore thumb in the room of fishermen and loggers. I was in my usual back booth, hunched over my laptop, when I heard him ask the barista about a brunette, maybe from New York, new in town. My blood went cold. It was a private investigator. Julian was not giving up. Before I could even think to move, Kalen, who had been sitting at the counter, casually slid onto the stool next to the detective. "Nah, New York lady," Kalen said, his voice friendly, almost bored. "Yeah, I think I saw someone like that. Headed north, up to Astoria. Said something about opening an art gallery. Left yesterday, I think." The detective, clearly thinking Kalen was just a simple local, thanked him, bought a coffee to go, and hurried out. I watched his immaculate rental car head north on the highway. Kalen brought his mug over to my table and sat down. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. I nodded, my hands shaking slightly around my cup. "He will not find you that easily," Kalen said, taking a sip. "We locals know how to take care of our own, as long as you are good for that 30%. As if on cue, my clean phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. It was Julian's first official settlement offer, forwarded from his high-powered New York firm. $1 million. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I was to sign, take the money, and disappear permanently. I typed back one single word to my lawyer. No. The real legal war was about to begin. Julian played dirty. He could not find me. So he did the one thing he knew would cripple me. He attacked my money. He filed an emergency ex parte motion in a New York court, claiming I was mentally unstable and had fraudulently transferred $8 million of marital assets to fund my delusions. $8 million that was my own inheritance. But he conveniently left that part out. A sympathetic judge, likely an old friend of his father's, granted his request. He froze all my Nevada LLC accounts. I was at the point, discussing the rebar grid for the main foundation with Sam. When her phone rang, I watched her face go from confused to pale. "What do you mean?" "It bounced," she said into the phone, her voice sharp. She was quiet for a moment, then cursed. "Yeah. All right." She hung up and turned to me, her expression unreadable. "That was our cement supplier. Alara." The check for the last delivery was returned. Account frozen. My heart did not just sink, it plummeted into an icy abyss. He did it. He actually did it. The roar of the excavator died as the operator, sensing the shift, shut the engine off. The sudden silence on the cliff was deafening. "Ilara," Sam said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I have 50 people on my crew. Payroll is this Friday. What the hell is going on?" I felt the air leave my lungs. I could not breathe. I turned and ran, stumbling down the muddy path to my Subaru, ignoring Sam yelling my name. I drove back to the motel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I slammed the door shut and slid to the floor, my back against the cheap particle board. This was it. This was my deepest, most primal fear. For 15 years, Julian had controlled every dollar, every account, every financial decision. This feeling, this absolute, suffocating powerlessness, was the nightmare I had spent my life trying to escape. I had underestimated how cruel he could be, how far he would go. I grabbed my clean phone and dialed my lawyer in Delaware. "He cannot do this," I yelled, my voice cracking. "That is my separate property. It is my inheritance." "He did do it. Ilara!" My lawyer's voice was grim. "A New York judge signed the temporary order. It is paper, but it is a powerful piece of paper. We have to go to court to get it lifted. We have to prove provenance. It is a fight we will win, but it will take... It could be weeks, or months." "Months," I whispered. I did not have months. I did not have weeks. Sam's crew would be gone by Monday. The project would die, leaving a half-finished scar on this cliff. I pulled my knees to my chest, the cheap carpet scratching my cheek. He had won. After all that, he had won. The dead weight was cut loose and sinking. I sat there in the dark, gray room for an hour, maybe 2. Then, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. My grandmother, sitting on her porch, snapping beans. She was a woman who had survived the Great Depression, a woman who did not trust banks, let alone men. She had not just left me stocks. She had left me something else, something she told me to never tell another soul, not even a lawyer, unless the world was ending. A true rainy day fund. My fingers were stiff as I dialed the international number, a number I had memorized 20 years ago. A precise, clipped voice answered in Swiss German. I gave him the codes. I gave him my grandmother's birthday. I gave him the passphrase. After a long, agonizing silence on the line, he spoke. The account is active. The balance is 500,000. U.S. It was not enough to finish the project. It was not even close. But it was enough to pay Sam's crew for 60 days. I transferred the money to a new local bank account I had opened under my own name. That night, I drove to Sam's house. I did not call first. She opened the door, her face set in hard lines. I handed her a cashier's check. "This is payroll," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "For the next 2 months, in cash, if you need it. Keep working. Do not stop. I am going to fix the New York problem." Sam looked at the check, then up at me, her eyes boring into mine. The look of anger was gone, replaced by something entirely new, a kind of wary, shocked respect. "Who the hell are you, Alara?" she asked, half awed. "I am the woman," I said, "who is not letting that bastard win. We had to go to court in Oregon to fight the freeze. It was our only option. Julian, true to form, did not just send one lawyer. He flew in a team of 3 of his best sharks from New York. They strode into the small, wood-paneled county courthouse like they owned the place, their $1,000 suits and leather briefcases practically screaming contempt for the local setting. Their lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a voice like oiled gravel, immediately went on the attack. He portrayed me as a scorned wife, a vindictive woman on a revenge spending spree, burning through marital assets to fund a childish fantasy. He used words like delusional and unstable, painting a picture of a woman who had lost her mind. My lawyer, a young, sharp woman from Portland named Jess, whom I had hired specifically because her online bio said she specialized in dismantling corporate bullies, did not flinch. She waited patiently for him to finish his theatrics. Then she stood up. She did not argue emotion. She argued facts. She placed my 150-page business plan on the judge's bench with a solid thud. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear. "This is not a revenge spree. This is a meticulously calculated business investment." She presented the geological reports from the engineers. She presented the signed contracts with Sam Kruger's team. She presented the letters of intent from Kalen and the local fishing cooperative. "Mr. Vance's lawyers in New York," she continued, "claim this project is a fantasy. This is the fantasy they are asking you to shut down." She held up Sam's payroll sheet. "Freezing this account, which our evidence will show is funded entirely by Mrs. Hayes's separate premarital inheritance, does not just harm Mrs. Hayes, it immediately puts 50 families in this county out of work, 50 families who are depending on this project." The local judge, a man whose brother-in-law I knew for a fact was on Sam's concrete crew, looked at the New York lawyers with undisguised dislike, but his hands were tied. The order from New York was legally binding, even if it was temporary. "Ms. Rowe," the judge said to Jess, "I appreciate the local context, but the New York order is clear. I need more than a business plan. I need tangible proof that this is a viable enterprise and not, as opposing counsel puts it, a delusion." I knew what I had to do. We needed a tailwind. That night, I called a well-known, highly influential travel blogger in Portland I had been following for months. I gave her a very carefully selected version of the story, a woman rebuilding her life after a toxic marriage. battling to create a world-class, eco-conscious resort that celebrated Oregon's wild beauty, only to be strong-armed by a wealthy, vindictive ex-husband trying to crush her and the local jobs she was creating. The story, posted late that night, exploded across the Pacific Northwest's social media. The hashtag #StandWithThePerch started trending in Portland. By morning, 2 local Portland news stations had picked it up. The county judge's office, I was later told, received over 200 emails of support before 10 a.m. The next day in court, Jess walked in with a stack of printouts. "Your Honor," she said, "we have new evidence regarding the viability and community interest in this project." She presented the articles. She presented the social media metrics. "This is clearly not a fantasy, Your Honor. It is a project the people of Oregon are already passionately invested in." The judge looked at the articles, then at the sputtering New York lawyers. He nodded. "The New York order," he ruled, his voice firm, "appears to be a gross overreach, and it is causing immediate and demonstrable economic harm to the citizens of this county." He banged his gavel. "I am issuing a temporary stay, releasing the Nevada accounts for use within the state of Oregon for this project, pending the full hearing in New York." I won. The money was free. I heard later that Julian broke his phone when he got the news. Work at the Perch resumed the next day, at double speed. We had won the battle, but I knew, deep in my bones, the war was far from over. He would not stop. We had exactly 60 days. 60 days until the final divorce hearing in New York, the one where Julian would marshal all his forces to paint me as unstable and incompetent, to argue that the Perch was a flight of fancy and that he, as the stable party, should control my inheritance. I needed the Perch to be more than blueprints and rebar. I needed it to be a living, breathing, profitable business before that date. We began working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The cliffside was illuminated by massive floodlights all night, a beacon of frantic activity against the black ocean. Sam and I made a critical decision: we could not finish the entire resort. We had to focus. "Cabin 1, I said, pointing to the flagship luxury suite Kaylin had insisted we move. "We finished that, down to the last light fixture, and the main kitchen. Everything else can wait." We needed a proof of concept. We needed something tangible, something undeniably real. We were 3 weeks into this mad dash when the weather alert started. This was not a normal storm. The meteorologists were calling it the storm of the century. A low-pressure bomb was spinning down from the Gulf of Alaska, promising sustained winds of over 100 miles per hour. Sam and Kaylin were grim. "Alara, we have to evacuate the crew and secure the site," Sam said, her face tight. Kaylin just pointed at the churning, sickly green ocean. "This is not one to be tested. We leave." "The crew leaves," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but I held their gaze. "You two can go. I am staying." They both looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "If this place," I said, gesturing to the half-finished cabin, "if it cannot withstand this storm, it is not worth building. I have to know." They did not argue. They just exchanged a look of weary resolve and started checking the safety lines. They were staying. The storm hit at dusk, and it was a physical, screaming thing. It did not just rain, it fired water horizontally. By midnight, the wind was a high-pitched, agonizing shriek. We were huddled in the kitchen when we heard a sickening, metallic groan. The new seawall was being battered by waves that felt like concussions. Then we heard a crack. A huge, 8 by 10-foot panel of triple-paned glass for the main dining room, which had been delivered but not yet fully secured, was visibly warping, bowing inward under the pressure. "If that goes, it will gut the whole building," Sam yelled over the roar. "We have to board it up." It was a suicidal idea. The 3 of us, me, Sam, and Kaylin clipped ourselves into harnesses, roped to the main steel beams. We grabbed a heavy sheet of marine-grade plywood and fought our way onto the exposed terrace. The wind hit us like a solid wall, trying to peel us from the concrete. Icy seawater, ripped from the waves below, blasted our faces. The plywood acted like a sail, nearly pulling us over the edge. As we wrestled it toward the window, a rogue wave, a monster, crashed up and over the seawall, sweeping across the terrace. It hit Kalen full force, knocking him off his feet and washing him toward the edge. He disappeared into the spray. I screamed, grabbing his safety line just as it went taut, the rope burning through my gloves. I braced myself, digging my heels in, screaming. Sam lunged and helped me pull, and we dragged him back over the edge, choking and gasping, but alive. We used the last of our strength to slam the plywood against the window and secure it just as another wave hit. We retreated to the utility room, shaking, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, the sky was a bruised yellow. The perch was still standing. We were inspecting the damage, weak with relief, when Kalen stopped. He was kneeling by the newly laid foundation of the main lodge, where a pool of water was forming. The main water intake pipe was broken. "This was not the storm," he said, his voice flat. He pointed. I knelt beside him and saw it. It was not a jagged crack from pressure or debris. It was a clean, straight cut. Someone had used a saw. I stood up, the adrenaline replaced by a cold, sharp dread. The private investigator, Julian, was not just attacking me in court. He was sending men in the dead of night to physically sabotage my work. "Fix it," I said, my voice hard as the rock beneath us. "Fix it now." I turned to Sam. "And I want security cameras, everywhere, on the access road, on the cliff, watching the site. I want a record of every single person who sets foot on this property." We lost a full, precious week to the repairs. The clock was ticking louder now. I could feel Julian's noose tightening, even from 3,000 miles away. We were running on fumes. The Swiss account was empty. The Nevada account had just enough left to cover the final shipment of glass and steel. But Cabin 1 was finished. And it was. I had to admit, breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of glass, reclaimed cedar, and dark steel, hanging suspended over the churning Pacific. It was either a triumph or the most expensive tomb ever built. I made one last, desperate gamble. I used the very last of our operating funds not on concrete, but on a helicopter charter. I sent an invitation to Eris Thorne, the most reclusive, revered, and feared travel critic at Condé Nast Traveler. I offered him a complimentary 48-hour stay. If he hated it, we were bankrupt. If he loved it, we might have a chance. He arrived on a Tuesday, the helicopter landing skillfully on the small pad Sam had just finished. He emerged from the chopper looking like an austere, long-legged bird, dressed entirely in black. He said nothing for the first hour. He just walked through Cabin 1, touching the cold steel, the smooth wood, running a hand over the linen sheets. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass window for 20 minutes, just staring at the approaching storm clouds. I did not try to sell him. I let my team do the work. Kalen took him on a storm walk, showing him the cliff paths, explaining the tides and the wind. Sam, in her element, gave him a full engineering brief, explaining the structural mechanics, the deep-anchored foundations, and the wave-powered generators. That night, I did not hire a chef. I cooked. I served him a 7-course meal built entirely from what Kalen and I had foraged and caught that day, king salmon seared on a cedar plank, delicate chanterelle mushrooms, and a broth made from local seaweed. The next morning, Eris stood on the cabin's private balcony, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sun rise after the night's storm. "I have stayed in every 5-star hotel in the world, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice a low rasp. "They are all, at their core, the same, upholstered boxes. This place—" He paused, searching for the word. "This place has a soul. It is terrifying, and it is honest." He left an hour later. He did not say if he would write the review. 2 days of agonizing silence passed. Sam and I sat in the half-finished kitchen, staring at our phones. unable to eat, unable to speak. Every minute felt like a year. We had failed. Then, as I was refreshing my email for the 1,000th time, a Google alert popped up. The article had just been posted online. The title read, "The Perch I Went to Oregon and Found the Future of Luxury." It's wild. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the link. He had not just liked it, he had loved it. He called it a life-changing hospitality experience. An elegant fortress against the beautiful chaos of nature. He called me Ilara Hayes, a visionary of authentic luxury. Within 1 hour, our bare-bones website and email server crashed from the traffic. Within 24 hours, after Sam got the system back online, we were booked solid for 18 months, at $3,000 a night. The money, real money, millions of dollars in deposits, began pouring into the Nevada account. We had done it. We were popping a cheap bottle of sparkling wine in the concrete-dusted kitchen, crying and laughing, when the new security camera feed beeped. A strange pickup truck was rolling up our new private road. We tensed, watching the monitor. A man got out, looking exhausted, rumpled, and broken. My stomach turned to ice. It was David, Julian's brother. I met him on the terrace, Sam and Kaylin standing 10 feet behind me. He would not look me in the eye. "Ilara," he said, his voice hollow. I came to warn you." He held out a small USB drive. "He knows he cannot win a fair fight. He knows about the article." "What is this?" I asked, not taking it. "Julian's new evidence," David said. "He had his finance guy fabricate years of bank records. They show you've been siphoning money from Vance Capital, millions, for the last 5 years. He is going to present it at the hearing next week. He is going to paint you as a thief. He is going to ruin you, to have you charged." I stared at him, my mind racing. Why are you helping me after everything?" David finally looked up, and his eyes were bloodshot, filled with a despair I recognized. "Because he did not just destroy you, Ilara. He destroyed me. Amanda left me. She took everything. My parents. My father. They're still protecting him, siding with him." "You," he said, his voice cracking. "You were the only one who ever stood up to that monster. Don't let him win." The New York divorce court was a complete circus. Julian's side of the room was overflowing with lawyers, a sea of dark suits. He sat in the middle of them, looking utterly self-satisfied, whispering to his lead attorney. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, vile smirk. It was a look that said, clear as day, "I am about to crush you." His lawyer, the silver-haired shark from New York, stood up to begin. "Your Honor, we will prove today that Mrs. Hayes is not only mentally unstable, but is, in fact, a criminal. We have undeniable forensic proof," he boomed, "that she has systematically embezzled over $2 million from Vance Capital over the last 5 years to fund this frivolous project of hers." He gestured, and an assistant brought out poster-sized blow-ups of balance sheets and bank statements. They looked professional. They looked real. They showed transfers, dates, and amounts that looked entirely convincing. The judge, a woman I did not recognize, looked over the documents and then at me, her expression hardening. Julian leaned back in his chair, relaxing. He thought he had already won. Then it was Jess's turn. She stood, the picture of calm. "Your Honor, before we address the creative accounting of opposing counsel, we would like to address the frivolous project Mr. Vance refers to." A large screen lit up. The first image was the glowing headline from Condé Nast Traveler. The next was a screenshot of our bookings page. "As of this morning," Jess said, her voice crisp, "the Perch has projected revenues of $14 million for the coming year. This is not a frivolous project, Your Honor. It is, by any metric, an extraordinary success." Julian's smug expression tightened. His lawyer started to object, but the judge waved him into silence. "And now, As to the charge of embezzlement, Jess continued, her voice sharpening just a fraction. We agree that there has been financial misconduct. However, we have some evidence regarding Mr. Vance's own financial dealings. She walked to the console and inserted the USB drive David had given me. This is an audio recording, Your Honor, of a phone call between Mr. Vance and his chief financial officer, recorded 2 weeks ago. Julian's voice, arrogant and unmistakable, filled the silent courtroom. Just move the money into Alara's LLC. The fool thinks she's building a treehouse. We'll use it to launder the money from the Shanghai deal, and when it blows up, the paper trail will point right at her. The dead weight is finally good for something. A complete, deafening silence fell over the room. Julian leaped to his feet, his face the color of ash. That is fake. That is an illegal recording that is inadmissible. It was provided by your brother, Mr. Vance, Jess said, her voice as sweet as poison. And we delivered a full, unedited copy to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning. On cue, 2 men in dark, sober suits stood up from the back row of the gallery. They walked calmly down the aisle and stopped at Julian's table. Julian Vance, the taller one said, his voice flat. You are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and perjury. The divorce hearing was over in less than 10 minutes. The judge, looking absolutely furious at Julian, ruled immediately. The perch, having been funded entirely by my separate, inherited property, was mine, free and clear. I was also awarded a significant portion of Julian's remaining legal assets. I stood and walked out of the courtroom. I had to pass Julian, who was standing, his hands being cuffed behind his back. He stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of pure animal hatred and complete, baffled disbelief. I did not say a word. I did not have to. I just looked him directly in the eye, held his gaze, and allowed myself one small, cold smile. The real dead weight had always been him, and I had just cut the final cord. I flew back to Oregon that night. As the chartered helicopter approached the dark coastline, I saw it. The perch, my fortress, was lit up against the blackness, defiant on its cliff, looking for all the world like a lighthouse. I was home, and this time I was completely, unshakably, and utterly untouchable. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I am so curious to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.